in the book where we begin to think about why we do the things we do, and what makes us who we are. So starting off with this question, why do we do the things we do? Who could give me some generalized answers to this? Some generic answers. Right? You guys are all college thinking, intelligent, academic, scholarly individuals. Answer this ideological question. Why do you do what you do?
Money.
What's that?
Money.
Okay. That's a good answer. Why do you do what you do? Why do you behave the way that you behave? Anybody else? Want to throw some factors up there?
Our desires.
Whatever you think the question implies. Right? It's an abstract question. Why do you do what you do? Clearly, we have to know why we do what we do, else we wouldn't do it. But maybe that's not true, right? So, abstract question, why do we do what we do? Right? Why do you guys show up to school? Why do you guys, for those who, drink, why do you drink? Why do you smoke? Things I don't know about you, like, why do you do those things? What are some of the things that make up? Okay, well, maybe we're at a loss, right? We don't clearly understand why we do what we do, which is the case for most of us. We have no idea why we do what we do. We just know that we do it. But for the most part, the things that we do make up our personality, right? If I were to ask you, like, hey, tell me something about your personality. Could you guys give me an answer about that? Personality, give me a trait of someone's personality in this class. Personality. Yes?
Kind.
You think that you're kind, right? Right, because our personality is, when we're speaking about our personality, we're speaking from the perception itself, right? So I can say for myself, maybe I'm a neurotic. I think too much about everything, each and everything, right? Try to think about every detail about everything, which is probably a very bad thing for health. So we're going to talk about some classical perspectives on personality, and probably the best way to understand it, and understanding why you do what you do, leads us back to Freud. And we talked about that id, ego, superego. Anybody remember anything about Freud? Clearest way to understand some things about our personality according to the theories of Freud. Think of this concept. Each one of us has a devil. Each one of us has an angel. But then between the two, each one of us has a judge and an executioner. right? So we all have an angel, we all have a devil, we all have a judge and executioner. All of us, all human beings born. The balance between the two lies with that judge and executioner, which we would call ego. Who here wants to give their interpretation of what an ego is, right? We hear ego all the time out in society and social media. What is an ego? What is an ego? Okay, we don't understand it now, but we'll get to it, right? But we'll get a better understanding of what ego is. Personality, individual's characteristics, pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting, right? Which is just typical, right? We can't really precisely understand human personality like we understand mathematics, right? We can get the best sort of consensus of what personality is, but these things are very average and very typical, so keep that in mind. But it is your pattern of thinking, your feeling, and actions. What are your thoughts do you convey? How are your emotions most of the time? And how do you actually place those things into action? We're going to talk about classical perspectives, the granddaddy of all theories, who really relates to Freud. Freud was observed psychoanalytics. Freud was actually a medical doctor, not a psychologist. But this was a different time. But he's probably one of the most influential individuals in the field of psychology, right? And then we have some new Freudian, right? Some neo-Freudian, later psychodynamic theorists. Then we're gonna go back a little bit to Maslow's theories on personality, how we need to attain basic needs before we can find out who we truly are, right? We need to go through these phases and steps. Go over a little bit of Rogers and some contemporary perspectives, trait theories, and social cognitive theories. So as I talked about before, on an everyday basis, we operate about 90% subconscious, right? You're tapping on your laptop right now, think of that. You're not even thinking about that. That's not conscious. Some of the thoughts coming from your brain to type are conscious, but the typing part that you're doing, that's subconscious. You learned that a while ago. You learned that back in high school. So now it's actually part of your program, right? There's no need to really think about ASDF, JKLM, right? All these different things we learned in high school. So here we look at it as a glacier, right? We see this as a glacier, right? We see 90% of all the stuff that makes up our personality is unconscious or subconscious, right? And the unconscious part, Freud described as an id. Now the id exists early on in life. So think of this concept, right? You have a baby. Baby's born, baby's hungry. What's the baby gonna do when it's hungry? Does the baby care about anything else going on in the environment? Absolutely not, right? Baby does not care. Absolutely no care of the environment, how tired you are, how much money you got. None of that matters. That is the id, right? We're born with the id. The id says, I need to be comfortable. I need pleasure, right? All human beings seek pleasure in some way. Why is that true for all of us? Do all of you guys seek pleasure? Yes or no? Who wants to deny that they seek pleasure? Who wants to have a debate? You seek pleasure because you're gonna go get some water if you get thirsty. You're gonna go get some food if you're hungry, right? You're gonna do something about it if you catch a cold. You get some medication, you do something, you rest, right? You need good oxygen, you need this. Which means that the human body, naturally born, as we are born, it seeks comfort, the right body temperature. Hence, you wouldn't put on a sweatshirt or a coat. It's cold outside, right? We are constantly seeking comfort or quote unquote pleasure. Pleasure is, comfort is part of pleasure, right? Therefore, we know that there's a pleasure principle, and this is how Floyd described the id, the pleasure principle. You may have heard this phrase, Janet Jackson, their popular song about the pleasure principle. But we are constantly seeking pleasure, but that is just automatic. Those things we don't really have to be too conscious about. So the baby needing something to drink, some milk, breast milk, it doesn't care about anything, absolutely does not care, right? Now that's about 0 to 6 months according to Freud. Past that age, we may see a change in behavior from the baby, and now the baby begins to suck his thumb, right? Or suck on his toes, or do something, right? Do something to facilitate pleasuring himself while the mother prepares whatever, milk or formula or whatever for the baby, right? We would think of that, we look like, oh, that doesn't really mean anything, but it does. It means that the baby is forming some sort of conscientious thinking about what's going on, right? It means that it's a little bit more mindful to the environment, a little bit more mindful of maybe other factors happening. So that's the unconscious energy. Floyd described that as an energy force, right? He calls that life force, right? So life force typically deals with anything that's gonna sustain your life. I'm gonna give you some water if I'm thirsty, give me something to eat, hungry, right? I'm gonna do all these things that's gonna sustain my life, to keep life for myself going perpetually. Then we have the superego. Now the superego is still below the waterline here, right? Because we say the ego is just really that very, very conscious part that we're constantly thinking, we're actually having these precise thoughts about. But superego is still internalized, it's underneath the waterline, it's still submerged, right? Now the superego is the internalized ideals. We internalize let's come back to the superego. I want to go to the ego first, because the superego is a little bit more interesting. Right, so that ego, mostly conscious, makes peace between the id and the superego, right? And so the ego is really understanding self, right? It is surviving to make self happy, right? It's thinking about different things that make it have a conscious mind. The ego is our perception of the world. There's all these different factors attributed to who we are, right? So we make the judges based on what's gonna satisfy self. But the superego is the bridge between. The ego is the bridge between. The superego is dealing with internalized ideals, which is basically what we've been taught in life. Our family things, values that we have been taught, things that maybe think of spirituality, religious ideas, all of these different things, right? Our opinions from our friends that we take into account. We have all of these internalized ideals with the superego. And it's still in the pre-conscious phase, right? As we move up to consciousness. So it's outside awareness, but it's accessible, meaning we can tap into it. We can tap into it, but it's actually outside of our conscious mind. So a lot of historians like to describe it as sort of the spiritual part of us, right? The spiritual part that we can access it, but we have to really dig deep in order to truly access it. Or it may come out on its own at different times. So some of these theories are based on personality, deals with psychodynamics, which is human behavior as dynamic interactions between conscious and unconscious minds. So the great balance between our unconscious and our conscious minds, these forces, these push and pulls between the two, constantly acting on one another. But we see that the unconscious mind is a huge part of all of this, which means it's the dominating force. So some of the more controversial parts of Freud's psychoanalytic theories were childhood sexuality and unconscious motivations influence personality, right? It's sort of controversial that Freud talks about how even in our childhood, we may have these sexual motivations, right, that are unconscious that, children aren't thinking of, but they still exist as part of being mammals, right? It's always constantly thinking about the reproduction and continuing these species going forward unconsciously. The discovery of the unconscious, he's very well known for that, and free association. Anybody know what free association is? No, right? So if you come to me for therapy and like, hey, Dr. Ross, I need some help. I got some issues from childhood or adolescence. Trying to really improve myself or conquer some demons, right? Lay on the couch or whatever, and just start rambling words. Or I'll throw out some words for you, and then I'll ask you to associate those words for whatever you come up with. So here, let's do an example here. I'm gonna ask each of you guys randomly a word. Tell me the first word that comes into your mind. You gotta think about it. Okay? I'm trying to get to the unconscious, not the conscious, so you gotta think about it. Money. First word comes, this first thing. Money.
Stocks.
Okay, stocks, right? So practical mind. Exam.
Greed.
Stress. What did you say?
Greed.
Grade? Okay, so we got grade, we got stress, right? So anxiety towards things. Let me think of something else. Family. Happiness, right? So therefore, we see some positivity with the inclusion of a group support systems bring happiness, right? Let me see, who else? Love in the back. Family? Okay, there we go. So think of all these things, and it goes on and on, it gets deep. I'm just throwing out generic terms. Normally, if it was real therapy, it'd be really tricky terms, right? To pull out something from the unconscious about you, right? And if you pull things from the unconscious, you really start to find out the truth about people, who they are, who makes up their personality, their behaviors, the things that's really bothering them that they don't even know about, right? So that's free association. Free association is just clearing your mind. Obviously, we're in a classroom setting, so everybody's still kind of uncomfortable to just, ramble off the first thing that comes to their mind. But free association is really pulling from the unconscious so that we're able to understand more of our issues, who we are, and how we can help those things. So Freud, very, very influential. Floyd and actually Carl Jung, who they work together. Carl Jung is kind of what I talked about with the shadow. The shadow is kind of finding out that dark part of us, right? Which we could probably contribute to being the big, how to conquer the big, or balance the, not conquer, because we need the to survive. So personality structure, human personality arises from the conflict between impulse and restraint and efforts to resolve this basic conflict, right? We want a balance between impulse and restraint. Impulse and restraint. Let's say we have anger. Let's say we have anger towards someone. We're extremely angry towards someone. What will our impulse tell us to do? If you guys are extremely angry towards someone, what would your impulse tell you to do?
What was the question again?
Let's say this. Let's say somebody came and hurt one of our family members. They hurt our mom. They hurt her really bad. What's your first impulse?
To be hurtful.
In what way? Let's say, what would be some things in your mind?
Fight.
Huh? You say fight?
Yes. Oh, for real.
Put a fight in the middle. What are some other impulses?
Protect.
Yeah.
Protect in some way, right? I'm gonna put protect over here. What's some other impulses?
Anger.
But still, it's part of anger, right?
Okay.
Okay, I would say
I
kill,
can see that up there.
right? For most people, the first real impulse, like, I gotta kill that person. Now they gotta die,
Yeah,
right?
that's what's so funny.
That's a real impulse in your mind. Whether you convey it or speak it out into the world, that's a whole different thing. First impulse, somebody hurts your mom really bad, is to probably kill them. They have to go. Right? Second would be the maybe fight, like, nah, I can't kill. You know, I kill, now I gotta get rid of the body, you know, cover up the tracks. You can't just kill somebody, leave them there, right? Then I get caught, they're gonna get put in jail for life, blah, blah, blah. Right? So you're like, okay, well, second option is to fight. Like, all right, well, I just gotta hurt them bad, right? Be hurtful. Gotta hurt them really bad. That way the consequences are not as extreme. And maybe the third part is like, well, how do I protect mine? And protect would be, you know, that could be vague. It's like, oh, you know, okay, I'm gonna reach out to the police, I'm gonna get a lawyer, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna mess up that person's life in other ways. Right? So we see that there's a balance between impulse and restraint. The restraint part is probably, hey, the law, you know? Or the restraint is like, hey, you know, I actually have morals. I'm not gonna kill somebody, right? Two wrongs don't make a right, you know? So we have this constant struggle, this constant battle in order to balance between our real impulses and our restraints. Most of the restraints only exist because society has them. We didn't have, can you imagine what our society would, what would society look like without any laws or any rules? You wouldn't have school, there would be no way. We'd all be outside killing each other. Everybody would take what they want. Anybody ever seen the movie The Purge? Right? You would essentially have the purge. And the purge is just exercising what people really are, what, you know, at the basis of who they are, right? And now you add all the social components. Oh, we got rules, we got laws, we got values, we got norms. Now you have a quote unquote civilized society, right? We're all civil. We're not all killing each other and taking what we want and doing what we want. Why? Because we probably, where there is, that's what it wants to do. It doesn't care. We said that the baby doesn't care. It doesn't care about the environment, just give it a milk. That's it. We also have those components in us too, right? And so we have these conflicts between these systems. And then we have the super ego. The super ego is what we will call the morality principle. The morality is, hey, what have you been taught? You know, what do you feel in your spirit? It's right or wrong. Right? What is right or wrong to you? What are some of your values? Right? What are your religious beliefs? What are all these different things that make you a good, decent human being? All right? The influences that's been there. And just, you know, things that are actually spiritual that just don't need to be influenced. You just know that that's right, you know that that's wrong. That's the super ego component. Which if we put here, we might be like, hey, you know what? I'm not gonna do anything. Karma will get that person, right? Our super ego will probably be like, you know what? Karma will get that person. Our idea to say, hey, I gotta kill that person immediately. They're done. Right, and then we have the ego. The ego is the judge and the executioner. The ego is the final say-so between our impulse and then our restraints. The ego is the middle. And that's why typically the ego is described as our true personality. Our true personality is like, hey, we all have the capacity to be very impulsive. We all have the capacity to be very evil. We are all self-seeking at the core. Nobody's exempt. There's nobody born exempt from these things. It's like, oh, I don't have that. I mean, like, no. These are universal. We all have the capacity, if you change the rules, the laws, the norms, all these different things, right? But what makes you who you are is your balance. How well is your balance towards one thing versus the other? How well is your balance with one thing versus the other? So, the ego is the active part, the one that makes the final decision. Are we gonna kill? Are we gonna forgive it and just let it move on? So keep that in mind. Those are the angels, the demons, and they have the judge and executioner. Right? The angel is the superego. The demon would be the id, and the judge and executioner would be the ego. And this is Freud's theory, which is, I think, pretty widely accepted throughout the field of psychology. Major influence. Any questions on that so far? Any arguments against Freud? Like, I don't agree with Freud. Think of something else? Okay, personality, moving on. I'll let this charge up real quick. So do we have an understanding of this so far? What are some other influences to personality, to making who you are, what you are? Other influences?
Your environment.
Absolutely. Right. Do we like negative people? Do we like to be around negative people? No? What kind of people we want to be around? Do we like positive people? Now, although we may think of negative as bad, I think negative sometimes is a realistic point of view, right? Which is sort of attributed to the ego. The ego factors in, hey, all right, I get the morality of it, right? I get what I actually want to do with the impulsive. Sometimes the ego reflects that, well, this is the reality of it. And so I'm making a judgment call based off what I perceive to be the real thing dealing with a certain issue. And so if you ever meet people who are extremely positive, right, you're like, oh man, wow, you have a really big super ego. And you can tell a person that, right? You see everything in a grand light of being hopeful and great and everything is good. And if you ever meet a very negative person, goodness, like, hey, you just got a big sister, you just have a big ego. You may see things in too much of reality, which is not, always the greatest at times too. Because the human mind doesn't work on 100% reality. Right? We always take into factors of things in the past, our creative perspectives on things. So our environment dictates our personality, right? People who grow in are raised in impoverished areas may typically have like a negative viewpoint. They're like, I'm gonna commit the crime. My life's not good, right? And maybe more impulsive. Think of that. If you go to impoverished areas, you're like, oh man, it's not to get eating here, right? Being healthy is not a big deal. Right? Being healthy in this environment is not a big deal. Why? Because we are seeking pleasure because we don't really have a true balance of life. So if you go to an impoverished area, you may see corner stores, convenience stores, a lot of fast food restaurants. Why? Because this is the enjoyment and happiness that these individuals get because they aren't really having a balance in their life because they live in poverty. Which we would call, whereas Freud described the id as life force, as life force, there is also a death force as well too. And the death force typically deals with the id. No, I'm sorry, not the id, the ego. The ego is the death force because it lives in reality and it pursues things on its own end that probably makes its actions not the best for sustaining life. So if you meet somebody who is a adventure seeker, right? Or very risky. People who are risky, who risk their life, people who do extreme sports, right? You say they have a very huge death force because they're not in consideration of preserving life like the id would do. So that would be more of the ego. So the id's pleasure-seeking energies focus on distinct pleasure-sensitive areas, erogenous zones, such as our sexual reproductive organs. Each stage presents challenges and conflicting tendencies. Oedipus complex, do we know what Oedipus complex is? Anyone knows what an Oedipus conflict is? Let's say the mama's boy theory, right? Someone who's extremely a mama's boy. They're extremely attached to their mother. That is an Oedipus complex, which seems to make a dominating force over, say, women, right? We'll say, hey, you're extremely attached to your mom so much that it's unhealthy that later on in life you may have issues in intimate relationships or romantic relationships with women. You may seek to dominate them as you do with your mother, right? So these are challenging. This is why, mothers bringing up boys, there's a huge challenge if a male is not present in the household to balance the masculine energy of the female energy. Identification, right? Which is, hey, we're trying to figure out who we are in the world. This is a huge challenge. Who are we? Right? Who do you want to be? What is your ideal self? What are you seeking to be? We'll get further on that about the different parts of ourselves, how we project and think we are a certain way, we're probably not in the eyes of others. And fixations, right? Fixations is compulsions over certain things. There could be a fixation on your grades. You could say, I have to get an A, I have to get a 4.0, 5.0. I just have to have the best grades, right? These fixations on life that probably are not very healthy in the long run, because they lead to other things. So we got 5 stages, according to Freud, right? We have an oral phase, anal phase, phallic phase, latency, and genital, puberty on, right? Puberty on. So we can say you guys are in the genital phase, all of us, including myself. All right, oral, 0 to 18 months, according to Freud. Pleasure centers on the mouth, sucking, biting, chewing, right? Which is all the pleasure of a small child is in the mouth. They pick up anything dirty. Does not matter what's on the floor, at the bottom, they'll lick the bottom of your shoe if you leave it on the floor, right? Which means that all of the pleasure is really risky. It's the id taking over. It says, I don't care about bacteria and viruses. Who cares about bacteria and viruses? I'll lick the bottom of the shoe. Right, and so because all the pleasure is centered on the mouth, there's a fixation there. The anal phase, which is 1.5 years to 3 years old, pleasure focused on bowel and bladder elimination and coping with demands for control, which kind of potty training phase. That's why it's very important to get it right with potty training at the right time, because typically we've seen that people who become very criminalistic. In fact, where does that come from? Why is this person such a habitual criminal? It sounds very, sounds almost kind of funny, but really, it's the upbringing. We're large children. Remember I always said we're nothing more than just gigantic children, gigantic bodies living in a quote unquote adult world. But we are really still have the components of our upbringing. Right? Pleasure focuses on bowel and bladder elimination, coping with demands for control. Which means if you let your child, don't potty train them fast enough, you just let them just go on, then they will lose control of discipline. They won't have discipline. It's not like that discipline just goes away. It carries on, and being undisciplined doesn't go away. It carries on and on and on. Now you have issues with work, having a career, making money, going to jail. You have a lot of promiscuity, right? People become very promiscuous because they don't have any discipline. There's no balance. The phallic phase, right? Pleasure zone is in the genitals, which is 3 to 6 years old. Coping with incestuous sexual feelings, right? Think about that. It could be looking at parents a certain way in a sexual way. It could be looking at siblings, cousins, aunties. These are people who are close to us. And so we were saying that even children have these sexual motivations at times, which are of the subconscious. If they're not dealt with, if they're not reinforced with values and rights and wrongs, then we can see people have some really, really major issues going on forward in life, dealing with sexuality, right? Because those urges, if not really understood, they carry on in life and they can be led to aggression, they'll be led to all sorts of things, aggression in life, period. Latency, 6 years old, so like 1st grade to puberty, right? This is a phase of dormant sexual feelings, which is, so it kind of goes away for a little bit, disappears, and now we're focused more so on friendships and doing good in school and being part of a social group and all these other things outside of sex, right? Sex is not really present in our minds at this time. And then we go on to whatever, late, maybe elementary school to high school, right? So you guys, a lot of you just came out of high school, so you understand these things, right? So puberty on the genital phase, which is maturation of sexual interest, right? Now you begin to explore sex and try to understand what it is and try to cope with the emotions behind it and, you know, instant gratification and all these different things. Now this goes on through adulthood, through late in life, all the way to death. Which is constantly what you see in commercials and stuff dealing with sex and Viagra and all these different things, right? So we're all dealing with this now. Now this is according to Freud, and sometimes this stuff is controversial, right? Take it for what it is. But still held on a lot in the field of psychology of our understanding of the different phases and causes of things. Time is it?
48.
All right, 2 minutes, let's finish this. Defense mechanisms, the ego's protective methods of reducing anxiety but unconsciously distorting reality. Distorting reality. Say, hey, I'm not like that. Why would you say I'm like that? I'm not like that. That person can be exactly like that. Does not matter, they have to defend, right? We have defense mechanisms in order to not deal with reality. We don't want to deal with reality because for us reality is a little too harsh. So we live sometimes in a fictitious world in our minds. Repression underlies all the other defense mechanisms, banishes anxiety arousing impulses, enable other defense mechanisms. Is often incomplete, such that repressed urges may appear as symbols in dreams or slips of the tongue. So if we say, hey, I'm gonna bury this thing, I'm gonna put it in the subconscious, I don't wanna deal with this, it will come out in other ways in life. You a slip of the tongue, which we call a Freudian slip. You may say something completely, way out in left field at any random time. Like, why did I say that? Well, you're repressing a lot of emotions in order to deal with life, daily life. All right, we'll continue this on Friday, and we're almost done, so just hang in there. And I'll try to help those exams graded by Friday.